So I'm 7 years old, and I'm sitting on the floor of the gymnasium in Green Bay Road Elementary School outside of Chicago. The entire school is watching a musical about the American Revolution. The scene is about the First Continental Congress of the United States, or the Second, I believe, Continental Congress of the United States. And the characters include John Hancock, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and others. The actors are all 9-year-olds, and they're singing a catchy tune. One character is wearing white tights and a white wig, and he keeps getting out of his seat and precociously stating his opinion. The other actors all stop what they're singing and roll their eyes, and they say in unison, "Sit down, John." Everyone on the gymnasium floor bursts out laughing as this happens over and over throughout the entire scene. This short, portly 9-year-old actor playing John Adams assumes a stunned and disappointed look each time that he's reprimanded. Like a kid being told to go to his room, John lowers his head and his shoulders slump and he sits back down. Every one of us kids could relate. But then John Adams would rise again moments later with his finger waving and another proposal on his lips. Of the entire musical of 1776, that was the only little bit I ever remembered. It left me with the impression that John Adams was the most loquacious and unpopular of our founding fathers. His face is not on any of our coins. It's not on any of our bills. There's no monument to him on the mall in Washington, D.C. So I never thought much about Adams, really. I knew that he and his son, John Quincy Adams, the 6th president, are both buried in a crypt in the basement of the Unitarian Church in Quincy, Massachusetts. I've been to see it, and I was duly impressed. But who was the man about whom historian John McCullough has said, if Jefferson was the pen of independence, Adams was the voice? I've come to learn that had Adams not delivered the votes on the floor of the Continental Congress, Jefferson's Declaration of Independence would have been at best a historical curiosity. When I began to research Adams, I found his commitment to liberty and independence were to the political sphere what the founders of Unitarianism in the United States, people like William Ellery Channing, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Theodore Parker, Joseph Priestley, and others were to the religious world. Just as the Declaration of Independence inaugurated a revolution for liberty in governance, Unitarianism was an American revolution for liberty and independence in religion. Both were major upheavals in the name of self-determination, fueled by the sentiments and the values of the Enlightenment. In the story of the American independence, we find the foundations of the Free Church, which is now known as the Unitarian Universalist Church. John Adams played a very pivotal role. His family were part of the great Puritan migration, the dissenters from the Church of England who came to the New World to take part in what they thought was creating a new city of God. His church, First Church in Braintree, now Quincy, Massachusetts, was and still is painted white without any ornamentation and has clear glass windows just like ours. That church would later become a Unitarian church in the early 1800s, once the religious revolution for liberty in Quincy caught up with the political one. Unlike Thomas Jefferson, who was born into a wealthy slave-owning family among the Virginian aristocracy, Adams was born into a New England farming family. Adams would eventually go to Harvard and become a respected lawyer, but he never gave up working the land with his hands. It says, most historians say that he never owned any slaves. He's one of the few among our founding presidents who didn't. Although in a conversation before this service with Reverend Davis, I'm told that is in dispute, that there's some possibility, according to the good Reverend, that he did indeed, and that Abigail told him to stop, and they got rid of their slaves. So we'll all have to research that after the service. But like many of the founding fathers, he read Greek and Latin. He was well versed in poetry and philosophy and ancient Greek and Roman thinkers. He loved books, second only to his love of family. Adams' relationship with his wife Abigail is one of the great love stories of the American Revolution. She was in all ways his equal and played a major part through her influence and her support. Words used to describe John Adams are high-spirited, affectionate, cranky, impetuous, self-absorbed, and fiercely stubborn, passionate, quick to anger, all-forgiving, generous, and entertaining. His qualities of being honest and outspoken and opinionated sometimes got in the way of him as a diplomat or as a politician, but his integrity was ultimately unquestioned. In 1770, when he alone, among lawyers in New England, was willing in the name of justice to defend British soldiers who were on trial for shooting 5 colonists in the Boston Massacre, he was first ridiculed, strongly and publicly, but ultimately he was honored for his integrity. This would have been like, maybe something like after the Oklahoma City bombing, representing the bombers. But this was back in the earlier days of the of the New World, when to do such a thing was, highly suspect. Now we consider that to be an important part of law. But it was Adams who believed that no man in a free country should be denied the right to counsel and to a fair trial. So his first truly substantial political work was in response to the Stamp Act, in which Britain imposed a tax on everything printed on paper. This included newspapers, pamphlets, diplomas, and playing cards. Everything printed on paper. And in his essay titled A Dissertation on the Canon and Feudal Law, he wrote, "The true source of our suffering has been our timidity. We have been afraid to think. Let us dare to read, think, speak, and write. Let it be known that the British liberties are not the grant of princes and parliaments, that many of our rights are inherent and essential. Let us recollect that it was liberty, the hope of liberty for themselves and for us and for others, which conquered all disagreements, dangers, and trials for those who came to these lands." The year he wrote this was 1765. He was only 30 years old, and this was powerful and subversive stuff. The sentiments rang through the colonies. Soon after, he wrote the Braintree Instructions, in which he said, "We have always understood it to be a grand and fundamental principle of the English Constitution that no free man should be subject to any tax to which he has not given his own consent. There's to be no taxation without representation," a phrase he borrowed, having been used for some time in Ireland. The following year, having won the repeal of the Stamp Act, Adams put aside politics and he continued as a county lawyer in Massachusetts. He handled all kinds of cases. He saw every side of life. And reputation had it that he was an honest lawyer, as honest as any that were known. And in 1770, tragedy hit his family when he and Abigail lost their baby girl, Susanna, who was just under a year old. 3 years later, Adams' cousin, Samuel Adams, took part in the Boston Tea Party. The next year, 1774, John Adams was chosen to represent Massachusetts at the First Continental Congress. At this point, the ports of Boston had been blockaded by the British, and the spirit of rebellion was in the air. Nevertheless, to claim independence was treason, and there was no widespread support in the colonies for a revolution. Independence had only been spoken about in private and rarely in public or in print. But by the year 1776, there were rumors that the king was hiring Hessian missionaries from Germany and sending warships to seize New York. New Englanders were oriented towards independence, but they were in the minority. Adams was determined, but he knew that he had to wait until the time was right to push for independence. He was brilliant. I hope you're getting this idea. He was bold, he was revolutionary, or depending on your perspective, he was dangerous. Then came the publication of the pamphlet Common Sense by Thomas Paine, of which historian McCullough writes, "It was written to be understood by everyone. Common Sense attacked the very idea of a hereditary monarchy as absurd and evil. And he named the royal brute, George III, as the cause of every woe in America. It was a call to arms, an unabashed argument for war, and a call for American independence, something that had never been said so boldly and plainly before in print." It reads, "Why is it we hesitate? The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. For God's sake, let us come to a final separation. The birthday of a new world is at hand." Paine was encouraged by Benjamin Rush, who was a Universalist, who was the one who came up with a name for the pamphlet, Common Sense. By now, Adams was well respected in the Continental Congress. Speaking more often than anyone else, he was constantly engaged in debate. At 5'7", bald and portly, we are told, he would stand in his place, back straight, walking stick in hand, at times letting the stick slip between thumb and forefinger to make a quick little tap on the floor, as if to punctuate his point. "We shall be driven to the necessity of declaring ourselves independent. And we ought now to be employed in preparing plans for confederation of the colonies." Here might come the tap of the stick. "And treaties to be proposed to foreign powers, together with the Declaration of Independence." So on June 10th, 1776, the decision was made to begin drawing up a Declaration of Independence. Although the vote on independence was to be postponed till July 1st. Jefferson, Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and 2 others were put on the committee. Adams was already serving on 23 other committees, and that week he was assigned to 3 more. Sounds like some of you here in the church. Jefferson was assigned to write the document, which he did without the aid of his books. It's amazing. Then, 241 years ago this month, on July 1st, 1776, the Continental Congress gathered to vote on declaring independence. At 10 a.m., John Hancock sounded the gavel. McCullough writes, "Presumably, everything that could or need be said on the question of independence had been exhausted in Congress. Presumably, the question would be put and decided with little further ado. But it was not to be. John Dickerson had resolved to make one last appeal, and Adams would be obliged to answer. They would rise to make their case like the great lawyers they were, each summoning all of his powers of reason and persuasion. To proceed now with a declaration of independence, Dickerson said, would be to brave a storm in a skiff made of paper. Indeed, the states had no standing army, no navy. They were proposing to take on the world's great empire and its army and renowned naval fleet. And they knew that a vote for independence was an act of treason, punishable by death. As Dickerson sat down, the hall fell silent. No one spoke, and no one rose to counter him. The air was thick with the solemnity of the decision that lay before them. Finally, Adams got up to speak. Objects of the most stupendous magnitude, he explained. Measures in which the lives and liberties of millions, born and unborn, are most essentially interested in what is before us. We are in the very midst of revolution, the most complete, unexpected, and remarkable of any in the history of the world. The power of Adams' words brought everyone to their feet. We are told that Stockton and two other new delegates from New Jersey had come into the chamber an hour after Adams had taken the floor and was nearly finished speaking. When they asked Adams to repeat what they had missed, he objected. "I am not an actor here to entertain an audience," he said. But at the urging of the others, Adams gave the speech again. By the end, he had been on his feet for over 2 hours. A preliminary vote was taken, and 4 colonies refused to proclaim independence. Pennsylvania went along with its delegate John Dickerson. New York abstained. South Carolina surprisingly voted against. And Delaware's 2 delegates who were present were divided. Recognizing that such a vote required all of the colonies, they postponed the final vote for 24 hours. After an evening of intense discussion and lobbying, they were able to get the vote the next day. It took 2 more days for them to amend and agree on Jefferson's declaration. It took 7 more years before the Americans would defeat the British and win independence. Adams spent much of the war in Europe, enlisting the aid of the French and the Dutch. He secured a loan in Holland without which America may not have won the war. Adams also helped negotiate the final peace treaty with England when the time came. He was a farmer, a county lawyer from Massachusetts, and he was a man who stood before kings on an equal level. At the time, few, if any, men had ever stood before a monarch, claiming his full worth and dignity and looking him in the eyes as an equal. So, in the last part of the 18th century, history was altered forever. It was the century of the Enlightenment, Locke and Hume, Voltaire, the Declaration of Independence, the French Revolution, and the establishment of the United States of America. In his essay, Thoughts on Government, John Adams would write, "How few of the human race have ever had an opportunity of choosing a system of government for themselves and their children. How few had anything more of a choice in government than a choice in climate." He would become the first vice president of the United States and its second president. Upon retiring from government, he and Abigail returned to their farm in Massachusetts, and he enjoyed his old age working the land, writing correspondences, reading, and entertaining visitors. In 1820, at the age of 85, he was chosen as a delegate to the state convention to revise the Massachusetts Constitution, which he had drafted more than 40 years before. It's in what was a final public endeavor, he offered one amendment. It was a guarantee of complete religious freedom. As he believed that all were equal before God, so he believed that all should be free to worship God as they pleased. This country has done much, he wrote. I wish it may do more and annul every narrow idea in religion, government, and commerce. A devout Christian himself, he spoke with regret of the intolerance of Christians. His amendment was not passed. But it's safe to say that just as self-determination and democracy in politics were the logical consequence of the Enlightenment, so too is freedom in religion. Just as people can be guided by conscience in choosing their government, so too can our conscience be our guide in choosing our beliefs, our ministers, and our practices. Unitarianism, which formed in America, in New England, in the 1820s, was a revolution against the tyrannies of orthodoxy, the bondage of dogmas, and the rigid acceptance of creeds. Its founders would no more accept the inerrancy of the Bible as they would the inerrancy of a king. The age of reason brought about many changes. People questioned the absolute power of monarchs and popes. Some people feared the use of reason in religion, and some still do today. Unitarian Universalism has been and continues to be a voice of liberty and self-determination in religion. This voice is as important today as it has ever been. There are those who will roll their eyes and tell us to sit down and be quiet. Like Adams, we may not always be popular for our opinions about independence and freedom, but we will continue to stand up without fear for that which is liberating and just. It is our heritage. It is our tradition. It is the American way. The road has been paved by those who came before us. May we have the courage as we walk in their footsteps and make it real for the 21st century. Amen.
You're visiting with us online today. We love connecting with people all across the country and around the world, sharing our powerful message of love beyond belief.
There's something new happening here. You can now join All Souls as a virtual member. Our virtual membership is designed for friends who live outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and who want to engage with All Souls in a meaningful way.
You can be part of an expanding family, a global family really, wherever you are. If you live in Oklahoma,
Ohio,
or Orange County, California,
Canada,
or Cameroon. By becoming a virtual member, you'll be able to deepen your connections with members and friends here in Tulsa and with members wherever you are.
Each week, you'll receive special All Souls content tailored for you, our virtual members. Virtual members have access to pastoral care, to personal prayers, and also receive invitations to exclusive web events.
You can learn more, and if you're ready, you can become a virtual member today by visiting allsoulschurch.org/virtual membership.
We're grateful our ministries are having a positive impact on your life, and we want to share the good news of love beyond belief with more and more people. So no matter what, we need your support to keep this ministry growing and thriving. So please consider making a gift today. You can do so by texting
LOVEBB for Love Beyond Belief to 73256 or simply visit our website. You are a blessing in our lives. May you be blessed
and be a blessing.